Okay, good evening, everyone. Just waiting for everyone there to come in. Glad so many people can join us this evening. And on behalf of Cycle Against Suicide and Caroline Lafferty, delighted to welcome you this evening to our expert speaker, Dr. Michael Sweeney, who's joining us from New York, where he's director of the Metropolitan Centre for CBT. Michael is a long-term friend and colleague of us here in UCD. He's been extremely generous over the years and sharing his expertise and his time and knowledge and helping with the training of lots of the clinicians here in child and adolescent psychiatry and psychology. So absolutely delighted to have Michael's input here, and I'm sure you'll all benefit from it. And Michael, just in terms of the slides there, you might want to put them into the slide show. So for everybody that's used to the format tonight, Michael will be delivering the talk over the next hour or so, and we will conclude at that point. We don't facilitate direct questions because we haven't found it to be a particularly helpful exercise. So it's just sit back, relax, and enjoy the talk, which I hope is helpful to everybody. And just to give a second to Michael to get the slides there into the slideshow. And I think then it's the duplicate one after
On the
that.
side. No,
Yeah, it's still in the side one.
center view. Does that get it right?
That absolutely does. Yeah, so we're good and ready to go. Thanks again, Michael. Over to you, and I'll turn off my video. Thank you.
Leonard, thanks so much for such a nice introduction. Let's hope that loading up the slides is the only thing that's going to be hard for me here. So I'm Michael Sweeney. I'm a psychologist. I've spent the last 30 years or so in the study and treatment of anxiety. And I'm going to spend the next 45 minutes or so speaking about exploring perfectionism and obsessive-compulsive characteristics in children and teenagers. So I thought I'd do a couple of things. One is I thought I'd explain how it is that people get anxious. An understanding of how it is one gets anxious is central to figuring out what to do with it. Because perfectionism and obsessive and compulsive symptoms are a subset of a larger category of anxiety. And then third, I thought I'd say something about emotions management skills that we should teach kids. So let's hope that sounds good to you. All right, so how is it that you get anxious? If you wanted the simplest model for how it is that some of us are anxious and some of us are not, three elements are particularly meaningful. The first is genetics, the second is vigilance to threat, and the third is the connection between thoughts, feelings, and behavior. Let me start with genetics. How anxious you are starts with a bit of dumb luck. Some of us are simply born sort of a notch or two higher on the genetics knob than the person next to us. Those of you who have more than one child already know this to be true because your children arrived as different people. That inclination, the knowing that genetics gets me there, is scientifically proven in repeated studies. It's an important way of understanding anxiety because if your thought about anxiety is that I'm anxious today as a byproduct of bad past events, that'll lead you down a road of trying to review and discuss all of those past events. But once you start seeing anxiety as it's proven itself to be, as a byproduct of genetics, you start realizing what I have here now is more of a generalized inclination that I'm going to have to cope with. To say someone has a genetic inclination for something doesn't tell you an awful lot. To have a genetic inclination for something, you still need a mechanism for that to work, a way in which it turns out. The genetic inclination for heart disease is that you have blood that's too thick, cholesterol, or veins that are too thin, coronary artery disease. The mechanism of transmission for anxiety disorders with regards to genetics appears to be vigilance. That is to say, at any given time, more stuff is happening than you can take notice of. And one, selectively attends to some stuff and not others. If I came to your home this evening for a meal and we sat around and talked all night long, lots of things happened. And on my way home from that meal, I get to decide if whether I make a headline out of the fact that you invited me and that we had a nice time, or if I make a headline out of my regret. I wish I hadn't have said this. I think that went badly. We each are writing our own daily headline based in large part upon the things that we notice. I typically give lectures to large audiences, and when you look out at the audience, you see, some of the faces look really excited and eager and engaged, and some of the people look like they're sorry they came. And if I disproportionately notice the faces of people that looked like they just weren't digging this, that'd change my experience of giving these talks. I spent a period of time as a research scientist. The screen you see now is one of the studies that we ran. We would flash faces. This is the same young girl. In one picture, she looks really pleased, and the other, she doesn't look so happy. We would flash these faces super duper fast, too fast to sort of notice. But with fancy technology, we were able to tell which one your eye was falling upon. And what we were able to determine is that anxious individuals really have a propensity to notice the I ain't so happy with you face. It's not a choice. Like in our study, the flashing pictures were so fast that it's not a choice. It's a kind of set way of being. I won't bore you with all the scientific details. The only point to take heart in here is that we don't pick equally from the news given to us. If I'm a student and I get a 95 on an exam, there's two bits of information there. There's both the 95% of the items that I got correct and the 5% of the items I got wrong. And I'm going to make one of those my headline. If I make my headline, wow, I got 95% of those items right, I pretty much know this material really well, isn't that great? That's going to leave me with one experience about myself as a student and one set of expectations about how the rest of my semester is going to go. Alternatively, if I make as my headline, wow, I missed 5% of those items. I didn't think I would. I don't completely know why I did. If I make that the headline, that headline is about threat. Maybe I'll miss even more items next time. It's about lack of control. Didn't completely realize I was going to miss them this time. So in that little example, you get the idea of how people can take the same news, but make something the difference of their focus. So that difference in focus drives the thoughts that are in your head. The thoughts that are in your head do not just sit there. They're engaged in a very active process of managing your emotions. The thoughts that I have, the attitudes or expectations, the internal conversations I have with myself, all of that stuff drives my feelings. If I was invited to a party this evening and my thoughts were, yeah, this is going to go great. I'm happy to see these people and won't this be nice? And there'll be a bunch of friends there. If that was my thought about going, you can see how my feeling about going would be, this is pretty fantastic and I'm excited to go. And you can imagine the behavior of that version of me at the party. The behavior of that version of me is engaged with people. It's my best self. Alternatively, if you left all of those details the same and just changed one element of the cycle, the thought, the expectation that you had, and if instead of having, a bit of optimism about the party, my thought was, this isn't going to go so great, and I never know what to say, and I don't know if they really wanted to invite me in the first place. If those are the thoughts that I have at the beginning, the feeling I get is really different, isn't it? The feeling I get is discouraged, inhibited, and consequently, the behavior you're going to get is a lot different too. Because what you'll get in that setting is you'll get like the inhibited, quieter, more on my back heel version of myself. That interaction, the thought, feeling, behavior, the that interaction describes an extraordinarily important part of anxiety, both because it amplifies it in such a big way and because it's your greatest point of intervention. So I'm born with my genetic anxiety knob turned a bit higher. Because of that, I tend to disproportionately notice, place emphasis on, and care about news that's kind of anxiety congruent. And now that my head is filled with all this anxiety congruent information, I do this circle. I have this anxious expectations, which drives up my anxiety, which alters the way I interact with the world. And in that way, people are creating their own experiences, right? I've got an expectation about this party. It's going to be lousy and no one will like me. And in that way, I'm creating the experience I'm going to have there in advance. And it's changing how I am at the party. And I'm creating that party being a different experience for me changes my expectations about the next one. And that's how I become the creator of my own reality. My bit of anxious genetics led to me grabbing a bunch of anxious information and being more interested in that than the other thing. And then that feeds into that cycle. And that's our best estimate of how it is that some people get themselves anxious and manage to stay especially anxious. Now, I mentioned before that this cycle, the thought, feelings, and behavior, is especially important, and it is. And it is because it's the greatest point of intervention. You see, you don't get to insist that you feel different. You can't say, I'm not going to be anxious today, or I'm no longer going to be upset about that thing. That's not the way feelings work. They're not available to be sort of pushed out of the way. In that cycle, though, you do get two things you get to control: thoughts and behaviors. And the interventions that we provide for anxious kids is focused on changing thoughts and changing behaviors. That's why it's cognitive behavior therapy, right? Because all of the interventions fall into one of two baskets: either cognitive, I'm going to change how you think about stuff, or behavioral, we're going to pick like a different way of behaving. So that's the quick method, our quick little overview of how you get anxious. Let me tell you a few things, perhaps equally as importantly, about how you get unanxious. What you want to do for your clients or your children or your students is first off, you'd like to have an idea of seeing it the same way. We're going to talk a lot about perfectionism. The perfectionist is holding on to that idea because it's a solution to them in some way. So I'll walk you through these 4 steps. The 4 steps happen to spell out an acronym of SWIM. It's that you want to see things the same way. You want to have a smart, informed guess as to why you're getting the behavior or the anxiety you're getting. You want an intervention or some information that you're giving them. You want some motivation for them to try it. The premise here is that anxiety management, emotions management for that matter, is a matter of skills, that some of us are a bit better at managing our emotions than others because we have ready access to emotions management skills. And those of us that are getting overwhelmed by anxiety would be well served to be taught some of these skills. So let me tell you what some of them are. Okay. You need empathy first. Nobody cares about how much you know until they have a sense of how much you care about things. The empathy is the prologue to every important conversation. I spend my life talking to people who are in a difficult way, one way or the other. Your empathy has to arrive first. It's your greatest way of making a bridge, and it's your greatest way of finding out information. Most importantly, the empathy allows you to get a shared view of the problem. If some of you are here, I imagine, because you have a child who's especially perfectionistic about grades. I'll take that as my example. You want an empathy conversation. If you want a conversation to be short and unsuccessful, lead with advice. people are usually not customers for advice. People are more often customers for empathy. The lead with empathy, hear the story, make it clear to the person that you're caught up on the details of their lives and why they are indeed anxious to this. Because most anxious people will tell you a rationale for their anxiety. It's a rationale that's compelling to them, so compelling to them that it drives them to be so anxious. So you'd like to have that as a starting point. The thing that you'd like after empathy as a starting point is you'd like some shared view of the problem. The perfectionism, obsessive and compulsive characteristics. It may be odd to think of it this way, but please keep in mind that my perfectionism or my obsessiveness is a solution of sorts, right? I feel terribly nervous about my exams that are coming up. That nervousness begs for some solution. I will not simply sit nervously. I will try to come up with the best thing I can do. And most people become committed to habits because it brings them a measure of relief, right? I've been anxious for every exam I've ever taken. And as such, as I have anxiety before this exam, it feels ordinary and familiar. It'd almost be scary to me as a super conscientious high school kid or secondary school kid. It'd almost be scary to me if the preliminaries to exam didn't involve my anxiety. And because I'm so anxious about my exams and my grades and my performance, I have this notion that my persistent thinking about it feels like I'm preparing myself in a way that I'm an extra nervous kid. I have big exams coming up. These big exams seem important to me. It would seem neglectful and cavalier if I did anything other than to keep thinking about them. I'm someone who relies on thinking about things as a way of controlling them. And so this is how I've become the perfectionist teenager that I am, right? Is that I've got stuff, it's got me super duper worried. And I've got a belief that if I keep thinking about it, I'm going to come up with a solution. Or that my keeping thinking about it at least makes me prepared. And that's why I stick to it as my habit. It really matters a lot to me. And these are not great plans, but these are the best plans I've come up with. The kids who have taken to these plans are making an imperfect calculation, though. One, they've not picked the best emotions management strategies. The other thing that they're not taking account for is that the inducement of anxiety that comes from thinking about it. If I sat here for the rest of the day thinking about some big exam that I had tomorrow, the not only would that not make me better prepared for the exam, but it would induce in me a level of anxiety that would kind of inform me that, geez, there really is something at fault. The act of sitting around and thinking of frightening things only makes you more frightened. The more frightened and nervous I am, the more I cling to the strategies I know. And in the case of perfectionistic youth or youth who are obsessive, the strategies they know is I'm going to think about this even more. And that's how kids who are medium worriers get themselves to be extra big worriers. So why? How did I get myself here anyway? Fine. Again, the symptoms that you're treating in psychology are often misguided attempts at solutions. In a lot of ways, the adolescent's perfectionism serves as a counterweight to their low self-esteem. I'm a teenager. I have all the kind of battles of self-esteem that you would think would be ordinary with the age. And I'd like a solution to that. One solution to it is I imagine that if only I could do this thing perfectly, if only my school grades were perfect, wouldn't that be a counterweight against my feelings of inadequacy to have something that's quite perfect? And that's why the grades assume a disproportionate importance to me. You see, if my grades were just, higher grades get me in better opportunities, that'd be a medium amount of anxiety. But when my sense of self, my self-esteem, my sense of sort of personal emotional safety is predicated on my grades, that's how I get super duper worried about it. Alternatively, as an anxious teenager, one of the things I've sort of bet on as my emotions management strategy is predictability. that I rely heavily on predictability as my emotions management strategy. The If you're shooting for predictability as an emotions management strategy, that's fine in and of itself. But if your predictability is I've got to do super duper well on these grades, it's going to drive you. You can't stop or not think about the grades. It pushes you to be super duper controlled because again, what's at issue were I to do terrible in these grades is not just that I get a low grade, but it's also a proof that my future isn't as predictable as I'd want it to be. The A lot of the high school kids that we talk to in the US get themselves into this line of thinking that tomorrow's history exam is not simply a standalone event because to do poorly in that exam would be for me to do poorly in this class, which would pull down my overall grade point average, which would disadvantage me for the college I might go to, which would disadvantage me for the life that I wish to lead. I'll have a lousy job after college. The And you see what you've done there is the what an independent observer would see as just one history class, one of many that you'll take in all your school years. Uh, in that description, you'd only allocate that so much worry, so much importance. But once I get stuck with this idea that tomorrow's exam is somehow weighty enough to alter my future, then it sort of makes more sense to worry about it as much. And lastly, control. The more anxious you are, you've noticed this in yourselves, I'm sure. The more anxious you are, the more eager, desperate that you are for control. The anxious amongst us are unduly burdened by a feeling of lack of control. And and if I can get my grades perfect, doesn't that make the whole thing a little more controllable? So you see what's happened here is I've started off as a medium anxious person, and I've grabbed onto some strategies to try to make myself not have to endure the discomfort of being anxious. And unfortunately, the solutions I've grabbed onto are more harm than good. Because once I grab onto being perfectionistic, let me keep thinking about this until I come up with a solution. Let me keep doing these things over and over again. That there's solutions of a sort. I mean, I do feel marginally better when I do them, but they incur more harm than good. So the see it the same way. Where things often go sideways when you try to help a person who's extra anxious is that you're at odds. I'm suggesting to you that you needn't worry so much about your grades, and you're suggesting to me that the grades are terribly important. We never get around to trying to solve the problem of how do you become a good anxiety manager because we never agree on a couple of things. The first thing you'd like someone to agree on is that you have a problem. The youth we see who worry too much about their grades or who have some subvariant of OCD, it's often really difficult to convince them that a problem exists at all. That they think that these habits are helping them manage their lives. They're a little wedded to them. It's the kid who wants to do super duper well at school because it gives them all the feelings we discussed a moment ago. You can't position yourself as a, hey, chill out. I'll teach you how to calm down. They're not that interested in calming down. If you said, look, I have two doors over here. In one room, there's a guy who's going to teach you how to calm down. And there's another room, there's a guy who's going to teach you how to be a better student. They'd ordinarily pick the how to be a better student. The, we often position ourselves with teenagers not as the person who's going to teach you how to calm down, but as a sort of performance coach. We can tell you how to do all the stuff you want, good grades, etc. We can teach you how to do it with less emotional expenditure. We agree with you. You get a lot of people like it when you agree with them. And the more points of agreement you can get with them, the better. So look, you're telling me grades are terribly important. I agree with you. And you're telling me that your future is very important. We certainly can agree on that. And that, hard work will get better grades. We can agree on all those things. The only thing I need you to agree on with me is this, that while we share all of the same goals, maybe there's a way to get there that doesn't have as much heartache and stress and worry associated with it. maybe all the things you want, predictability, success, good grades, certainty, that maybe those are perfectly fine and reasonable things to want. Maybe there's a way to get there without having so much upset surrounding it. I just want to have a conversation about how there's implications the way you're pursuing your goals, and maybe there's another way to do it. One of the challenges you have in psychology is you're often selling people on a version of their lives that they haven't lived. If you've been super duper anxious most of your life, it's really hard to imagine a life without being super duper anxious. You want to agree on how we got here. The easiest thing to do, you don't need to agree on every detail of how we got here. We just need to agree that you've gotten here, you, the extra conscientious student, which is a nicer name for it than the obsessive student or the perfectionistic student. How we got here. And the road to perfectionism is paved with good intentions, perhaps. I got here because a bunch of things that anybody would care about, I care about. Grades, friends. And now we're here because the strategy I have is really effort-filled. When you want kids to change, it's really helpful if you tell them what's required of them to change. The basic premise in behavior therapy, and perhaps in psychotherapy in general, is that people would be different if they knew how to be different. Most of us would be happy to be 10% less anxious. We're just not that clear about how the heck you get there. And once we see it the same way, once we agree that there's a problem, once we agree that you can still have the things you want, but maybe with less heartache, then people are probably a bit more inclined to take from you your suggestions about how it could be different. The last sentence there is, what will we do different tonight? And that sentence is always there for this. The act of changing your life, the act of being the steward of your emotional health is it's a doing action. There's a lot of psychotherapy, there's a lot of emotions management that's predicated on the idea that I'm going to think about these things, that I'm going to have this insight, that I'm going to have this understanding. And all of those things are fine. I'm not going to come out in opposition to understanding. All those things are fine, but you do need a verb in here. Like you do need a thing that you're going to do. If you tell me something you'd like to be true for you a month from today, we can probably agree on the thing you should do different this evening, right? You're a teenager and you're sitting in my office and you're telling me how much social anxiety you have. You can't stop thinking about social anxiety. I should meet that concern with kindness and with empathy and with curiosity. And we should try to agree on what we're going to do different tonight. That you're pushing for, if you want to change your life, you've got to change what you're doing in some way. All right, the why. So as you were saying before, it's swim, S-W-I-N. The S is see it the same way. The W is why. So why did we get here, right? What you're doing is you're making your best your best guess as to how the person got there. When you're making your best guesses, look out for a couple of things. A lot of people get stuck on some sort of big story where I'm an extra anxious 17-year-old and I had a lousy thing happen to me at some time. So those two things must be related. And the reason I say be careful about that is it's very easy to think that, I'm super duper anxious about my grades today. That's because I had a particularly mean teacher when I was in third grade. That sounds about right. And there's perhaps some truth to that. The problem when you pick those big stories, one big thing is what made me what I am today, is it turns it into a sort of a backward looking approach to it. What happened years ago? Looking backwards and planning your steps forwards are not necessarily congruent with each other. If you're trying to solve a problem, what often makes bigger, better changes is if I can find something that's in the moment that's facilitating this. I am super duper worried about tomorrow's exam because someone was mean to me years ago, or I'm super duper worried about tomorrow's exam because I think it's going to change something about how I feel about myself. The second one is both probably truer, and it's certainly a much more addressable means of it. And and everything has multiple causes. Be careful. Once you start throwing sentences like, she is this because of this singular thing, if you're picking singular causes, you're probably missing several of the contributing causes to it as well. So, notes on causality. Be careful about starters versus keepers. The things that start you down a road are not necessarily the same things that keep you going down a road. When I was a teenager, we all started smoking cigarettes because, we thought it looked cool when we were, 14 or 15 to smoke cigarettes. 3 or 4 years later, I wasn't still smoking cigarettes because I thought it looked cool. I was smoking because I was addicted to cigarettes. That's an example of a behavior that has a completely different starter than keeper. I started being anxious for a whole host of reasons. What's keeping me anxious now might be quite different from that. The here and now is more instrumental to change than the there and then. You're looking for the today thing, right? I'll stick with my example of being nervous about exams. I have an exam tomorrow and I'm especially nervous about it. If that's the case, we want to do a couple of things. We want to agree that empathically and how awful that is, and sort of meet our children with the love and care that we have for them. We'd also like them to tell us a little bit of what they usually do, and point out to them that the worry part isn't the part that's advancing their grade. And then we try to sell them on this idea that if you have a big test tomorrow that you're especially worried about, you probably need two plans. One plan about how to do well on the test. I'm going to study and I'm going to review the material. And a second separate plan about how to manage your emotions. We find that it's helpful when you break it out into the two so that people don't confuse, oh, I'm just going to study a lot as their anxiety management strategy. Because you can study a ton and still be really, really anxious about something. So break it into two, have people do whatever is reasonable and practical to be prepared for the exam. And then we need a second plan that's going to address just the anxiety piece of it. If I have a history test tomorrow, there's different things I can do about that. I'll discuss all of them in a moment. Yeah. Here, the why of the behavior. Again, the presumption here is that I have this ongoing anxiety because there's a skill deficit, right? That if I knew how not to be nervous about exams, or if I knew how to get that thought that's always rattling around in my head out, or if I knew how to be 10% less worried about that thing, I would do it. I would be less worried about it. There's a skill that's missing, which brings me to the part of the talk that I'm most interested in giving you. So what are those skills? What's the information we can give our kids so that they'll be less nervous? There's a countless number of skills that you can teach kids. They fall into one of three categories: changing thoughts, changing behavior, or increasing social connectedness. Those are the three that you have. And what I'll do is I'll go through examples, a couple of examples of each of those. I'll use I'm obsessed about exams and my school performance as an example. But the interventions would apply whether I was obsessed about my school performance or whether I was perfectionistic about something else. So here we go, right? Social support. Emotions management strategies, by the way, are supposed to get more sophisticated as you get older. When you're a little kid, your first emotions management strategy is to make enough of a fuss until your parent comes and is kind and comforting to you. When you're a teenager, the emotions management strategy that you're supposed to be making great use of is social support. I mention this because you'll get more obsessive and perfectionistic behavior is more of a sort of a secondary school problem than a primary school problem. So what you'd like is social support. I've got a history test tomorrow and I'm terrified about this history test. If I have a couple of friends in the same class, one of the things I can do is measure my concern against theirs. If my concern is at an 11 and their concerns are at 6, maybe that gives me cause to question whether all this anxiety is sufficient. If I know how much preparing my friends have done and I can compare that to how much preparing I've done, maybe that gives me a bit of comfort. If I know the other kids in the class and we have some study experience together and I realize that I'm equally prepared as they, maybe that gives me something. All those are ways of social comparison that I benefit from with social support. The other great benefit to social support, of course, is distraction. Left alone, I have nothing to do but think. The distraction plays a really helpful role. And thank God for the company of others. We have a running joke at the center, which is thank God for other people's problems, because we ourselves have whatever problem we have with our kids or our wife or our marriage or what have you. And going and getting engaged with others and engaged in the process of trying to help them distracts you from your own thoughts. So social support gives you social comparison. It gives you a lovely type of distraction. And it also gives you one other thing to think is important in your life. The one way to believe that your problems are the biggest and the worst is to make them the only problems that you know. And if you grade yourself, boy, I'm only good if I do X. Boy, that's a perilous existence, because if X doesn't go your way one day, all that you use to sort of account for how good you are is gone out the window. But if you're good at school and you have a few good friends, at least your self-esteem is spread across a few things. So social support is skill number 1. Cheerleading is skill 2. Cheerleaders are big in America. We've got lots of them. You'll forgive my cultural lack of knowledge. I don't know that I've run into cheerleaders in Ireland, but you've seen enough American movies to know what they are. They're people who stand on the sideline and say incredibly encouraging things to you. Anxious people stink at cheerleading. When you listen to the thoughts of people who worry, they're very busy telling themselves some version of this won't work out, this won't go well, this time it's going to fail. You want to get people to be really smart about the idea that if I said to you the sort of discouraging things you said to yourself, you'd probably stop being friends with me. You can't say, incredibly discouraging things to yourself and then be surprised when you feel super intimidated about going. So if you can find an opportunity for a bit of personal cheerleading, it goes a long way. If you can just stop yourself from the sort of personal anti-cheerleading that you're engaged in, that'd go a long way too. Planning. If there's an emotions management strategy that I love, that's really, really underused, it's planning. For most of us, the anxieties that we struggle with recurrently. That's what the problem is. And the person who always, has great social anxiety at every party. I'm going to a party this weekend. My social anxiety is probably coming with me. And if I have terrible performance anxiety about school and there's an exam next week, my performance anxiety is going to come with me too. The problems you have are the problems you have. They're going to reoccur. You should use planning for these sorts of things. Right? If I'm a student and I'm always obsessing about the sort of grades I have, I should probably have a plan. Maybe I have a list of 5 reasons why exams turn out okay for me. Maybe I have a list of 2 or 3 reasons why, even if this exam doesn't turn out so super fantastic, it's not the end of the world. Maybe I plan on studying with somebody, because when I study with somebody, I find myself getting less anxious than when I do it alone. Maybe I have a plan to spend time with people the morning of the exam, because with other people, I'm distracted. What I'm doing with my plan is I'm realizing that my anxiety is driven by certain expectations or certain behaviors or certain settings. I'm doing my best to not make those happen again. if you don't have a plan to push back against your emotions, it's hard to call yourself prepared for them. What's my emotions management plan? I'm going to a party next week and I'm really shy. My plan is that I'm going to go with my super talkative friend who's going to break the ice. And before I go, I'm going to think, oh, these are like 2 or 3 cool things to talk about. That'd be part of a social anxiety plan. I can't stop thinking about my exam grades from next week. My plan could be that I could come up with thoughts where I take the strength out of the importance of obsessing. Boy, I spend millions of hours obsessing about these things. I'm hard pressed to think of a return on investment there, where my millions of hours of trying actually yielded something. That's planning. Cognitive restructuring. Cognitive restructuring is a real industry term because there's not a great non-industry term for it. But essentially, it's challenging the veracity of the things that you believe. The the things you tell yourself, that ongoing internal conversation is extraordinarily influential in the mood that you have, right? If I meet people all the time and they say things like, "Nobody loves me," um, "Nothing works out for me," um, "Nobody's trustworthy." And you can see how if your internal dialogue is "Nobody loves me," "Nobody trusts me," "Nothing works out for me," you don't have to spend that long repeating that to yourself before it starts to have an impact on your mood. When you talk to the people about those experiences, they're not making it up. Like that, nobody loves me. Like they really do have experiences to support it. But when you talk to them a bit and you apply enough empathy and you care enough about what their experiences were, what you find out is that somebody important to me uh, no longer loves me back, but other people do. And somebody I trusted proved themselves to be untrustworthy, but other people were. And something that I cared about didn't work out, but other things have. And that difference between nobody loves me and someone really important has stopped loving me, but other people still do, that break in the ice, if you will, makes a big difference. And that's all I'm doing with cognitive restructuring. I'm not trying to sway you from everything's terrible to everything's wonderful. I'm just trying to sway you from everything's terrible to a slightly less emphatic statement, right? If I fail this exam next week, it'll ruin my life. If you're telling yourself that, you're making next week's exam extraordinarily important. The if I fail next week's exam, it'll get averaged in with all the other grades I have, and my other grades are quite good. So the averaging in of this only has a limited ability to change my actual. That's still not a great idea that I might fail this week's exam. But you see how it has less emotional potency to it. It has, because it has less emotional potency, the version of me who's like a 5 on the nervous scale gets to study, as opposed to the version of me that would be like a 10 on the emotions scale, right? So I'll fail this test and the rest of my life will be, screwed because of it. That makes me extra nervous and makes me a really lousy studier. Alternatively, if I fail this exam, that would be bad, but it has a limited window of badness to it because I've already got so many other good grades. That's true. It's believable. I could hold on to it. I've restructured my beliefs so it's a bit softer than it was before. That leaves me medium anxious instead of extra anxious. And the medium anxious me can probably bring themselves better to study than the super duper anxious me. That's cognitive restructuring. Mindfulness. As many of you probably know, the the person who's driving us crazy is us most of the time, and certainly a lot of what gets you going crazy is this ongoing conversation you have with yourself. Mindfulness is an attempt to turn off that conversation. And you're attempting to turn off the conversation you're always having with yourself by paying attention to your current experience with some bit of kindness and curiosity. So I sit here now as I sit here, were I not speaking to you, I could be thinking anything. Oh, my bills are this, and my teenage boy is that, and the problem with my car is this, and the problem at the university is, I could be thinking all of those things. Of course, they'd all make me more and more anxious. If I was just looking for a pause from that, though, I could pick one sensory experience available to me, right? That chair is black, and this floor is beige, and that tree is green. All I'm doing is noticing a sensory thing around me. Because while my focus is that, it's an interruption of that internal voice that has me worried about my son or my work or my marriage or my weekend or whatever else. That's mindfulness. It's a way of hitting a pause on the anxiety making internal dialogue. Mindfulness. Exposure and response prevention. All right. So perfectionism, obsessiveness, and compulsiveness, they come in different amounts, small, medium, and large. The when it gets larger, I was speaking before about how perfectionism is an ill-conceived attempt at managing how anxious you are. And of course, obsessions and compulsions are the same, right? I'm an especially nervous person. I would love a sense of control. That somehow I've latched on to the idea of checking something. And so I check my door several times before I leave, or I check that the stove is off, or I wash my hands repeatedly as an extra level of protection against some bad thing that I think is going to happen. I'm an extra anxious person who's wedded himself to one of these strategies. They are compelling to me as strategies because when I do them, I feel a bit better, albeit temporarily, but I feel a bit better. And when you are anxious and upset and in a darker place, if you find something that makes you feel a little bit better, you're pretty married to that thing. You're going to do it a bunch. And if you do it and it makes you feel a little bit better, you're going to do more of it. And that's how you build yourself up into a lifestyle where you're spending an awful lot of time thinking about something or engaging in some behavior. The treatment that has been worked out and for which there's really good evidence now is called exposure and response prevention. It's not a great name, quite frankly. But what it's meant to be is this: that I'm going to expose myself to a setting that would normally make me quite anxious, right? I have OCD and I am extra worried about germs. And what I do is anytime I get near germs, I wash my hands to excess. Fine. I'm going to meet that person with empathy and curiosity. I'm going to hear how much it matters to them, and I'm going to hear all the ways it's changed their lives. I'm going to try to gin up their motivation for change by getting them mad at how much of their life is stolen by this, how unfair it is that other people get to lead simpler lives with less burden of anxiety. When I have that person seeing it the same way, I'm going to try to teach them some strategy, some alternative way, right? Think about germs differently than you do now. Maybe they ain't that bad. They can't be terrible if they're not harming other people that much. I'm trying to find some cognitive restructuring, some alternative way to see it, or some use of social support or one of the other skills we just mentioned. And then I'm exposing you, by which I mean I'm going to put you in a situation that generates this sort of anxiety for you. And I'm going to prevent you from having your ordinary response, in our example, washing your hands, but instead ask that you use one of the alternative and anxiety management strategies that we've learned together. Talk myself down. I want to do that cognitive restructuring thing where I don't say quite as sort of emotionally evocative thoughts to myself. And in doing that, I'm hoping to have an experience where I realize I can put myself in those situations and not engage in that behavior. That liberation from my compulsions is a possibility for me. And if I could do it once, albeit kind of hard, I could probably do it a second time and a third. And that is a very brief description of exposure and response prevention. So the motivation. Remember, I was saying that the steps come out to swim, SWIM, M being the final one, it's motivation. The challenge that you have, especially with child and adolescent patients, is that they're not phenomenally motivated to change. I run a child anxiety center. It's only a small portion of the kids who are asking their parents to come. What's far more common is that parents or teachers notice a problem and suggest that the kids go. When you're looking at motivation with kids, you got a couple of choices, right? In in the perfect scenario, what you do is you get them to list for you who it is that they would like to be. We all like to see ourselves in a certain way, smart and capable, popular, efficient, something. And for most of us, the part that anxiety plays in our personalities is not the part that we like. If you ask me to sort of describe the ideal Michael Sweeney, I wouldn't add a lot of anxiety to my description of the ideal me. So one source of motivation is you try to get kids to strive for what's called the ego ideal. There's a person I'd want to be, and there's not a lot of room in that life for extra anxious. The That's one way of going at it. That's a really nice way of going at it, especially for kids who have sort of high motivation, high aspiration. Another way to get motivation in a kid is to get them mad at things. It's always struck me as incredibly unfair that some people are anxious. Some people just get to go to a party and talk to people and like have a nice time. And it just seems a little bit criminal that you don't, and that your anxiety prevents you from that. But some people know something's upcoming and they don't spend the week before dreading about it. They just kind of prepare and go. And it seems, again, a bit of a crime. So that'd be motivating, you hope, for kids that they're getting something stolen from you're looking to tie change to something that's already important to them. The act of changing your life is not that easy. We've all tried to change something with greater or lesser success. And the thing we can all testify to is change isn't easy, that habits have a sticking power. It's really helpful for us as parents to keep that thought in mind. It's easy to lose your patience with kids. Your children mean so much to you. You would like very much for them to not have the anxiety or the obsessiveness or the whatever other problem there is. Our eagerness to help them can often come across as impatience. Impatience is not a helpful ingredient. If you start with a bit of appreciation about how imperfect you are, about how your own change hasn't been that easy, that probably brings you with a bit more kindness. If you start the conversation with your kids around empathy and curiosity, I just want to know what it's like for you. I'm gonna do my best to shut up and not give you advice while you tell me what it's like for you. And then if you try to agree that a better life is available, that these skills seem practical, and that maybe like a lot of other things in life, a little bit of effort could move us in the right direction. Those combinations, kindness, curiosity, seeing anxiety as a skill deficit, and then picking one or more skills and really trying to practice them. In that recipe are most of the important features of addressing perfectionism and obsessiveness and compulsiveness as it exists in kids. So with that said, I will stop. I see we're just past our time. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you for being here today.
Thanks, everyone. And thanks again, Michael, for a fantastic talk. And I know I've learned loads, and I hope everyone else has taken on board some key pieces of info to go home and do differently. As Michael said, it's with anxiety, it's all about the behavior change. So on that note, again, Michael, thanks so much. And we won't see everyone again before Christmas. So I hope you're all settling into a nice phase of prep for Christmas. Good night, all.